Member for Kamloops Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for presenting the budget today, and to all the Ministry of Finance staff that have worked very long hours and very long days to get us to where we are today. I will say on behalf of the official opposition, I'll keep my remarks. I will be 2 hours. I don't know if I'll be exactly 30 minutes, but just in case. I won't be 2 hours today, just for everyone at home. But, you know, I would have thought that after canvassing yesterday in question period around all the communication staff that were hired by the Minister of Finance over the last few days after the hiring freeze was announced, that she would have had in her speaking notes one really important part on this budget that was missed. So for the viewers at home, an $11 billion deficit. That was missed out of the minister's budget speech. So I thought it was important that maybe we get that out of the way right off the front. And Mr. Speaker, in my time here today, you know, I just want to touch back a bit. The minister touched on a lot of things that the government did in 2018. At first, I wasn't going to go back in history, but I thought I should on budget dates. So the budget typically is presented because we've heard a lot about trying to present this budget on the backdrop of tariffs, which happened to be on the exact same day. And we knew that on February 1st, that March 4th would be tariff day after they were first delayed. Well, back in February of 2020, then Finance Minister Carol James, as part of the budget, brought in legislation that changed the ability for the government after a fall election, which we thought at the time would be a fall of 2021 election, to present the budget by the 4th week in March. Lo and behold, not that they were planning back in February of 2020, Mr. Speaker, to have a October of 2020 election, but magically there was a fall election in 2020, and the new government was not going to have to present a budget in 2021 until the 4th week of March. At least late Premier Horgan had us sit for a couple weeks that December in 2020. So one of the only pieces of business was actually to amend that new piece of legislation to give the government the ability to present a budget after a fall election by April 30th the following year. And in fact, they waited till April 20th for that first budget to be presented. Why I say that is, one would think, after all of the over-the-top war analogies that were used in the throne speech, this government might have, given the seriousness of the tariff threat, decided that of all years, to delay the budget or move it forward a week and not have it land on the exact same day as everyone's trying to sort out what exactly the tariffs mean, might have been a good year to do that. But nonetheless, here we are today. And that pretty much sums up this tariff response in this budget. It's non-existent, Mr. Speaker. There is nothing in this budget around the tariff response of meaningful programs or supports or even possibilities. So when the Premier or when the Minister talks about $4 billion in contingencies, including supports for impacts of tariffs, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that last year's budget projected a $3.88 billion contingency fund in this year's budget. That means $122 million extra is in this budget, or $112 million extra is in this budget, than what they were already planning on budgeting last year. Hardly an aggressive response to potential impacts of tariffs, Mr. Speaker. And I don't know if the government's noticed, but it's been a pretty dry winter. Something tells me it might be a bit of a bad fire season for those contingency funds as well. Trade, Mr. Speaker, before tariffs, year over year is down 3% in BC. Exports are down 3%. We were already facing troubles heading into this budget. Yet this minister and this premier is trying to convince everybody that this is strictly based on an $11 billion deficit on the uncertainties around tariffs. Interprovincial trade. We called for that in our election campaign platform that the premier routinely liked to mock. It's interesting that although we have a new updated modeling on what will happen with U.S. tariffs, there's been no modeling done or provided, at least to the public, as to what removing the interprovincial trade barriers, as we've been calling for since in the election, including in January with mutual recognition programs, would actually do for the positive of the BC economy. to demonstrate just how serious and how quick we need to move on interprovincial trade. Yet there's no modeling for that. There's only modeling about the potential negative impacts of tariffs to the United States. But we know that interprovincial trade is a 23% tariff equivalent to British Columbia. We know that New Brunswick today actually removed barriers immediately on things like alcohol moving between provinces. Nova Scotia had tax relief in their budget introduced last week, even in the face of tariffs. Promised tax relief for business and for residents. Yet this government, despite the fact they made campaign promises, has not followed through on any of their campaign promises in this budget. In fact, the deficit is flat out not realistic in this budget, Mr. Speaker, and it shows why this government has tried using tariffs to walk away from their campaign promises, and I'll dig into that just a little bit. In last year's budget, this government was forecasting 2.3% growth for this fiscal year and an $8 billion deficit. Well, at the 6-month check-in point for this current fiscal year, so for the end of September 30th, this government, on page 39 of that document, on the second quarter update, had already downgraded growth to 1.9% for British Columbia for this coming year. The growth projected in this year's budget document is based on a 1.8% growth, which means the Premier, as a sitting Premier, with full access to the Treasury, as the books were unfolding last year, heading into an election, surely ought to have known the financial state of the province as he was making campaign promises, like a $1,000 grocery rebate, which has been officially revoked in today's budget on the same day tariffs get announced, which will actually increase our grocery prices. That is the logic of this government, Mr. Speaker. The plain facts is that this budget has actually been modeled on what numbers they were showing as of September 30th in their second quarter report. Yet somehow they're still blaming tariffs. The U.S. election hadn't even happened yet. And the Minister of Finance would know, because the Minister of Finance was openly campaigning for the current president's other candidate against him at that time. You know, we hear this minister talk about sharpening the pencil repeatedly. Sharpening the pencil. So let's look at that. The full-time equivalents, last year in the budget, they said they wouldn't hire any more than 500 people more. Yet in that same second quarter update, they said, oh, good news, we haven't hired any more than we did at the end of the first quarter. Problem is that was 2,000 people, not 500. So this time last year, they told us they were only going to hire 500 more people in the one category. They hired 2,000, and now we're supposed to celebrate the fact they're not hiring any more than that. The BC public sector compensation chart last year had 520,000 people on it. In 2017, when this government took office, it had 320,000. In this year's budget, in the backdrop of the minister saying, sharpening our pencil, tightening our belts, watching every penny, this year, that 520,000 is 593,000 on the public sector compensation rolls, Mr. Speaker. That is what this government means when they say sharpening their pencils. I'm not sure how many of those are in the minister's communications department or not. But is it any wonder then, based on the same modeling that they provided in September on what this year's budget would look like, pre-tariff, the deficit is up $3 billion. Spending is up $4 billion. There's some good pencil sharpening for you. Debt to revenue is up. Debt to GDP is up. GDP growth is down, and our debt per capita has gone from $17,000 a person to $21,000 a person, Mr. Speaker. In fact, our debt over the next 3 years is going to grow by another $68 billion. When this government took office in 2017, the total provincial debt was 50. 50. It was bad enough they doubled it in their first few years in government. They're now going to add another $70 billion. We will bet $210 billion at the end of this fiscal plan after this government starting at 50. It took 150 years to get to 50. It has taken this government 8 years to quadruple that. It is shocking, Mr. Speaker. Let's look at housing for a minute, because again, results do matter. And there's been a lot said about housing. Again, a lot of this language is the exact same language we've heard every single year, much like the throne speech, every single year in a budget. The problem is most of these programs are existing programs. And when you read the language very carefully in the speech or in the document, it's continue or have keep on with. It's that type of language. It's not new. It's not expanded. And for the few programs that have a few extra dollars to it, the way this government runs programs, no doubt they do, because everything winds up over budget. Doesn't mean they're actually adding any more capacity to the programs. It just means they need more money to underdeliver once again. So on housing, we heard the minister talk on $90 million continuing on for homelessness. Of course we support that. But it's a continuation. It's not new money. It's because the other program is coming to an end, which was funded at about the same rate. And you know why they need to continue that on, Mr. Speaker? Because if you look at the project's over $50 million descriptions, and you look at almost every single BC housing project listed, they're all running significantly behind schedule. There is no homes to put people in. No wonder they need a homeless program to continue on for another 3 years, Mr. Speaker. These are the results that we've been getting from this government year over year over year. Housing values down 8.3% of the value of building permits. Number of permits down 12.8%. Multifamily down 7.2%. Now these are all numbers in this year's budget, Mr. Speaker. I'm not inventing these numbers. These are the government's own numbers. You wouldn't know it from the speech we just heard. But that's the government's performance on housing, based on their own black and white document. In fact, it's interesting because in 2025, with 5.5 million residents, the government keeps patting themselves on the back that we will have 46,000 new home starts. Well, in 2017, when they took office, with a population of 4.8 million people in BC, there was 44,000 new home starts. So I would suggest to the government that if they think an extra 2,000 homes per year, when you're adding, what, about 100,000 people a year, isn't exactly tackling the housing problem that the government makes you want to think they're doing. So, Mr. Speaker, in this bill, or in this budget document, I'll point out some of the other campaign promises that aren't in this. Again, when I was watching the other provinces roll out their budgets over the last few weeks, many commitments governments made to businesses, to residents, have been followed through on. All of those provinces are exposed to tariffs, and when you hear the minister talk, they're more exposed than BC. So I'm not quite sure what BC's excuse is, but it is an excuse, make no mistake about it. And again, if they doubt me, they can go back and look at their own second quarter update document about what they were projecting this year to look like as of September 30th. No health commitments. Hopefully the Green Party perked up to that. That was a signature piece of the whole confidence agreement. Nothing in there that they agreed to a few months ago with the Green Party to cling to power. No grocery rebate. $320 million or $370 million over 3 years to the K-12 system for teachers' assistants, for a wide range of things. Yet the Premier promised a teacher assistant in every classroom up to grade 4. I don't think $120 million a year is going to cut that, even just that promise, let alone all the teachers you need to hire and everyone else for just natural enrollment growth. No involuntary care. Certainly no expansion. No expansion of recovery and treatment. No increase of any significance to agriculture. Again, in our platform, we committed to doubling agriculture in British Columbia. Threat of food security in this tariff war have never been more relevant. Nothing in this budget to deal with that of any consequence. In fact, this government is projecting, you're not, like some of these numbers in this booklet are just incredible. 7,000 job losses in the agricultural sector is projected in this year's budget document. Does that sound like a government trying to grow agriculture in BC? That does not sound like a government serious about agriculture to me. That sounds like a government managing a decline and not prepared to do anything about it. But you know, the Ministry of Environment, they see just under $1 million bump to their budget this year. Again, backdrop of an agreement to cling to power with the Green Party. Just under $1 million for Ministry of Environment increase. Well, Ministry of Environment, 50% of their budget is for staff. They've confirmed that to me in previous year's estimates. $1 million isn't even going to cover the increased cost of staff even before the new agreement for labour. The interesting thing is, though, and we heard yesterday from the Finance Minister, that political staff are considered core to this government and protected by the hiring freeze. Those will continue. And boy, do they ever, because although the Ministry of Environment as a whole ministry has less than $1 million increase, the Premier's office actually has $1 million increase in it. Talk about priorities of sharpening your pencil, Mr. Speaker. 7,000 job losses in the agricultural sector, a cut to the Ministry of Environment, and an increase to the Premier's office budget.
Disgusting.
So, Mr. Speaker, this government likes to take credit and go on and on and on about the economy doing so well in BC. And again, I ask them, if it's doing so well, why are we running record deficits year after year after year? If it's doing so well, why do we actually not have a clear path to a balanced budget? In fact, the deficits stay high for the next 3 years. No clear path there whatsoever, no chipping away at it. It just keeps going up. In fact, once again, in their own budget documents, they make a very clear statement that our economic growth has mainly been tied to population growth and immigration. Not because any magical thing this government's been doing, because of population growth through immigration. And one of the key risks is that our population is supposed to decrease. It's projected to decrease next year and this year. So the cash cow of immigration that's kept this government even remotely close to having an economy functioning, not in balanced budget territory by any means, but at least functioning, is disappearing in front of our eyes. Vast majority, once again, 5 straight quarters in their own budget document, out migration primarily to Alberta in the tens of thousands of people. That trend seems to be more than just a blip after 5 straight quarters, one could argue. And it was masked on those previous quarters because our immigration number overall was still going up, but no more. Because of the change in the PR rules and students, it's on full display in this year's budget. Pretty sure that has nothing to do with tariffs, Mr. Speaker. That has to do with a government who has squandered opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to seize the moment, to tear down internal trade barriers, to actually have a robust economy in BC going. They're running a record deficit, and they're doing nothing meaningful to try to get rid of internal trade barriers that would kickstart our economy. Why is that not being done with or without tariffs? It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll just close with this. There is no targets in this budget. There is no tangible jobs plan. There is no tangible housing plan with anything new that we haven't heard year over year over year. There's no clear direction on what this government is trying to do with trade expansion, what goods and what countries they're trying to actively target for that expansion. We have no line of sight to that. We have no line of sight of what interprovincial trade being removed would truly look like and what would be the most key sectors to do it in right away. Nova Scotia has signed off on it. We've introduced through our leader a private members bill today, model on what Nova Scotia did as well. Could be done very quick. Look how fast the Premier changed his mind on trying to put a carbon tax on dirty coal coming through BC after we brought it up. Or how fast the government started to move despite having a crack team of cabinet ministers sitting together trying to figure out how to deal with tariff issues, having our rookie MLA from Prince George Mackenzie, after asking for months for relief on biodiesel, has to introduce a private members bill that gets actioned a day or two later. So the government will want to keep playing their games around this. We're taking the tariff threat very seriously. We've been bringing forward actual very meaningful and tangible ways to lessen the impact and protect jobs in British Columbia. I'm not sure what the Premier and his cabinet are doing other than repeating the same talking lines created by an ever-growing communications department. But, Mr. Speaker, make no mistake about it, be it from agriculture, be it from internal trade, be it from any sector you want, this budget, with the amount of money they are pushing out the door with it, is nothing but a colossal document of missed opportunities. There is no boldness in this. There is no big reach. There is no programs whatsoever to try to meet the challenges we're going to be facing over the next little while head on. So we're going to continue to bring forward meaningful changes that can be actioned, and hopefully the government continues to listen to this side of the House, as they have on 3 different occasions to this point, and we'll continue moving that forward, Mr. Speaker. So with that, I'll reserve my time and adjourn debate.